Good day, all, and welcome to Critical Faculty. I'm your host, Hani Salim. Sometimes I feel like we've died and gone to hell, and the punishment is for us to repeat ourselves over and over and over and over again about things that have been established, well, long time ago in science and in biology. But I think we owe it to ourselves and to the people watching our shows to understand that evolution is fact. And I've got just the right person and guest to tell us about some trivial questions about evolution. How do we know it's true? How can we actually falsify the premise? Because a strong theory is falsifiable. Please join me in welcoming Aron Ra. Hello, Aron. Good day. How are you?
How you do? How you do?
We were just talking offline, and before we start, I just saw a lot of animals in your background, dogs and cats and parrots, and I'd love to know the how many animals do you have as friends?
I have one parrot, a double yellow-headed Amazon named Max. I have my son has vinegaroon and a giant hermit crab and a couple of rats. My wife has a couple of rats that are pets, and then we have she has two leopard geckos that are hers, and then we have three cats and five dogs and I think 75 snakes.
Wow, wow! How long it took you to sort of have all these animals? Are done over the years, or?
Yeah, oh yeah, it's taken years. My wife started. She got interested in snakes and was interested in like possibly breeding snakes, though we haven't had any success with that yet. And she was simultaneously like rescuing dogs from the pound. And
Hmm.
uh, to tell you what, having dozens of snakes is so much easier than having two dogs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've never owned a snake, so how's it to have one? What does it require? And do they
Well,
form a bond? I mean, do they know who you are and connect us somehow with you?
that requires a very intelligent snake. It also requires good handling and all of that. I have a reticulated python that I'm quite happy with, and
Hmm.
I have a my two favorites are my reticulated python and my false water cobra, and they're
Hmm.
both relatively intelligent. And the retic is reputed to be the most intelligent of all snakes, and the false water cobra knows because we've raised both of them since hatchlings, since recently after they were hatched. I've had them both since they were like 6 weeks old, and they know how to be pets. They know the routine of being handled, and I will very often take them like to beer gardens, and let him hang out on the table with us or crawl around and explore a little bit. And the retic is especially fun with that because he doesn't try to run away. He doesn't try to hide like you would expect a snake to do. No, he just wants to explore. And you know he climbed on the last time I took him to a beer garden. He climbed down off the table, down off my chair, and then climbed up my wife's chair, and then climbed all over her, and then climbed back down, and came back to my side of the table, and I got out of the chair because I was getting video. He crawls back up onto my bar stool and then back onto our table.
Wow.
That's just
Wow.
the snake is obviously very comfortable.
Hmm.
And I did something similar with my false water cobra. I took her out to my son's house to meet him, set her on the table. She gets down on the table. She wanders around the kitchen for a little bit, and then she crawls back onto the table, crawls up on the table, crawls onto my son, and just wraps around
Right.
him while we're talking and stuff. And she's just being social,
Right.
and
Right.
that's not common behavior for a snake, even for pet snakes. So,
Wow. Wow. I mean, obviously there's some uniqueness in different animals, but what is the fascination with reptiles? I mean, in evolution, we understand that sort of these are the older ancestors, and mammals were sort of borrowing and hiding a little bit, and we are the offspring of the little things that survived the 63 million years old event. But what's your fascination with reptiles in particular?
well, I never quite grew up. I was a little kid, and I just always loved reptiles as a child. I mean, my
Hmm.
family would often go on picnics or camping trips into the forest, and there would always be some by some riverbed, in an alpine area. And I remember being, I don't know, like 8 years old, 10, 11. We would go often, and I would always come back from the river with hands full of snakes that I caught, just different species, and I've got them all in my hands at once. You know,
Do reptiles only have the hind brain that we have? So you have the reptilian brain, the midbrain, and new cortex, the new area. Do they only have that hind brain that basically is what you see is what you get? It's sex, food, and life is so
uh, the,
simple.
the basal brain, as you put the R cortex, the reptilian cortex, yeah, and then mammals will then put the gray matter, wrap
Yeah.
the gray matter around that, and then it's just a different way of operating the brain. Birds had to be reclassified when it was realized that birds are in fact reptiles.
Mm-hmm.
So and they don't have a mammalian gray matter cortex either. They have the same type of brain that other reptiles do. It's just that theirs is it is more efficient.
Mm.
I like to look at the competition between performance cars in the 70s and 80s, the way Americans would do it. That would be the way mammals would do it. Just make the engine bigger and bigger and bigger. Whereas the Europeans, their performance cars would be refining to be more performance oriented. So you've still got a small engine. The engine didn't get necessarily larger, but it's so efficient that they can compete with each other.
Right, right. I mean, some birds, I think kookaburras, crows, and magpies, they display quite intelligence. Some even understand the concept of zero.
Well, when you talk about crows and magpies, those are both corvids.
Yep.
And you include ravens and grackles and that sort of thing. And
Yeah.
the ravens, I think, are top among birds, right along with certain parrots.
Mm.
So yeah, the my double yellow-headed Amazon is quite intelligent. The African gray, I think, is the
Oh, yeah.
most intelligent of all parrots.
Very
And the
smart. Yeah.
difficulty thing, the weird thing about what the intelligence of animals is, if you look at all of those animals that have an exceptional intelligence, look at the bodies they're stuck with.
Mm.
Look, elephants, for example, they've got a trunk, right? That's their one means of manipulating anything, right? So how much experimentation can you do? Now, the most intelligent of animals are all social, because that's necessary to be an
Mm.
intelligent animal. You have to have social interaction. There has to be different forms of communication going on. Solitary animals don't have that and can't figure it out, but social animals do. The problem with all of these highly intelligent social animals is that they are all stuck in a body where they can't develop that intelligence the way that we did. Dolphins and whales, for example, the fuck can they do? They don't have hands. They can't pick up anything. They live in an environment where any form of chemical experiment is impossible, right? Corvids and parrots, you're going to stand on one foot and hold something with one foot. There's not a lot of dexterity involved in that.
Mm.
Now, if you look at the really generalized bodies, the type of animals that would really be able to expand that kind of intelligence, would have generalized form. You need something that can stand bipedally or walk bipedally, and that has like the
Free hands.
supplations in the wrists, where you've got some degree of thumb action, and you can manipulate things in your hands. Raccoons are a perfect example of what would be the ideal animal to give an intelligence to. However, and I brought this up at a conference where there was a biologist speaking. He brought up that they'd done this genetic research on raccoons. I said, why is it that raccoons are procyonids? So they're like karyotypic of the ancestors of dogs. It's as if, in a sense, what people would used to call a living fossil. Raccoons remain kind of the same all across the northern hemisphere. You've got just a couple of different varieties. So you've got like the cotamundi in South America, basically the South American version of the raccoon, but in the northern half of the world, raccoon is raccoon is raccoon, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, why, if these were to have the advantage of encephalization, an enlarged brain, they'd be able to use it, right? And the difficulty there is that the guy was telling me that in his part of his lecture, he said that raccoons have a surprisingly slow mutation rate. So they hardly evolve at all.
Mm-hmm.
Despite their incredibly wide range, you would expect there to be more diversity than there is, and it's attributed to that very slow mutation rate. So now let's imagine that all of these are intelligently designed. And that means God created the perfect body to become Rocket Raccoon from the Avengers franchise, right? Perfect outfit for hyperintelligence, the perfect way to use and manipulate and develop that.
Mm.
And he disabled their
The software
process, right? So they left them in this primitive state, like seemingly indefinitely. And then everything that does have a ridiculously powerful brain is stuck in a body and an environment where they can't do anything with it.
Yeah.
You know that pigs are smarter than dogs?
Yes.
How are you going to develop that? You're on hooves. The fuck can you do with hooves? So if there was an intelligent designer, he's deliberately... Why would you give super intelligence to these certain animals and they can't use it? There's no way that they can develop it any further. And then why would you say, something like a raccoon and say, you know what, we're just going to turn the volume down on that so that doesn't evolve the way it should. So the only thing we've got is this one line of primates. And then what differentiates us from the chimpanzees? Strangely, it's our degree of empathy.
Mm.
Now, chimpanzees and bonobos, it depends on which ones you're looking at. The bonobos are the lovers and the chimpanzees are the fighters. And the bonobos have like matriarchies, and they negotiate everything through sex. I mean, they're just all about sex. Whereas the chimpanzees, the troglodytes, they are the warriors, and they will
can wage wars, yeah.
kill you, and they kill each other. They're absolutely brutal, right? They're like, it's like you take the duality of man, right, and just split it in half. One half bonobo, one half chimpanzee. That's like a terrible way of looking at it, but it seems to be appropriate. And the chimpanzees don't have the empathy that we do. They don't see another. They don't feel another's pain. They don't recognize the frustrations that somebody else has. When they see somebody in need, they're not as likely to do something about it as we are. And that was where we got our strength as a species. Because what would end up happening with like any herd animal, you have a predator jump out and try to weed out the slow and the weak, right?
Mm-hmm.
Only while everybody else is running away and you pick out the slowest and weak one that didn't get away, all the rest of them did. Oh, good. Safety in numbers, right? That's that strategy. But our species is a little different than most. There are a couple of other species that will do what we do. And that is their greatest strength. When you find that slowest and weakest one and attack it, you now notice that you're facing the whole fucking herd. They didn't run. They turned. And then what are you going to do? So I've seen some very emotionally emotive videos of lions grabbing a wildebeest, or not a water buffalo. You got a baby water buffalo. There's like 3 lions on this baby water buffalo. Ha, we got this. We chased all the herd off. We got this. Except that the herd comes back.
I think I've seen this, yeah.
Yeah, and now you're facing 60 fucking water buffalo, and they're all 3 feet from your face and advancing. And these cats decide, you know what? I'm not particularly hungry.
Very wise.
Fuck out of here.
Yeah. Very wise.
So that was the strength that we had. It wouldn't matter what kind of an awesome predator you were. You could take any of the predators could take out any one person. Can't take all of us.
Yes.
And we would come at them with sticks and with stones. We knew how to throw projectiles, and you can take out a tiger if you got enough people throwing rocks, and eating sticks. The tiger, what's he going to do? At best, he might get 1 or 2 of us, and the rest of us we're going to injure him, and he doesn't have health care.
Yeah. I've always maintained intelligence and collaboration. These two things are so mighty. But a very interesting point you brought up to do with the morphology. You need to have the software and the hardware aligned to get together. Even like language, we understand that some animals might even have the hardware of speaking, but they don't have the software, the 5 spots in the brain that will allow you to actually develop a language. So it seems that you gotta have that sort of, the stars need to be aligned for these two things to match together, and then you can do something about it. And that doesn't seem to have any aspect of design. It's
Yeah,
a
especially when you think if you just assume that there is a designer, he's a dick. He unnecessarily gave these other animals all this potential and then thwarted them with this body design that can't develop it. And then the one that can develop it, well, no, we're going to put in something else to hinder you. So, with chimpanzees, for example, right? I mean, just when you turn down the motor or the mirror neurons, where they don't have the development of the prefrontal cortex, so they can't see the empathy that we do. They're more akin to psychotics. You know, they don't have the feeling of, well, you know, that person's in pain, and that there's no impetus that hey, maybe I should do something about that. You know.
Well, we know it happens to some individuals of us. Some individuals of us, don't have that, and they can be a natural born killer, a brilliant movie. But there are people who actually have that, and as a result, they commit atrocities, almost like a chimpanzee, completely void of any emotions.
What I have seen, I've seen studies that have toddlers recognizing when somebody is experiencing difficulty and the toddler jumps in to help, which is something that chimpanzees tend not to do. They don't, they're in their own, for their own interests, and as long as their own interests are involved, they'll continue. But once they're distracted or they don't think they're going to get anything out of it, they stop. So they're very selfish. That's the difference between us and the chimpanzees. We had just that one behavioral tweak that we have more capacity than they do to empathize with someone else's suffering or need.
Yeah, which is
Well,
not
we can't even
completely.
talk about that anymore because they call that woke now.
Oh, that's ridiculous. Yeah. You know what I mean. But even on the surface of this, the altruistic behavior has elements of, again, self-interest. I mean, you feel somebody else's pain because deep down, consciously or subconsciously, you'd want to know when you are in trouble yourself, somebody else is going to give you a hug and say, everything's going to be all right. So there is some sort of reciprocal altruism mechanism going underneath it. What do you think about that?
There could be. I've heard arguments, people trying to diminish anything that if I see somebody that's hurting or what in need, and I step in to do any damn thing, even if it doesn't require a whole lot of effort on my part to help them out. If people are telling me, well, the only reason you're doing that is because it makes you feel good, and there are instances I can think of where no, I've stepped in to help somebody where it just cost me, where I get nothing out of it, not even appreciation. But I know that it has to be done, and this poor idiot is just going to be in a sorry state if I don't, and I don't have to hear them say thank you or even understand why I did what I did. Just I know why I did what I did. And sometimes I get tired of trying to explain things to people and then having to explain why I'm explaining things, because not everybody's all that smart.
Yeah, and you can do it to an enemy. Like, it could be not be justified at all. Somebody who's not really nice to you, but then something is grave is about to happen to them, and you say, I can't just see that. I don't like them, but I'm not going to see them die. So I completely get you. Now let's go to the main theme of today's conversation. Unfortunately, you and I and other people like Erica and Dave and so many people have to every now and then tell people things like the evolution theory, and we're going to have to explain what theory is, and things like that were sort of like really makes me sort of angry, but you gotta have to repeat yourself and tell people every now and then a theory in science is not what you discuss over a beer in a bar. It's a different thing. So can you please tell people why evolution is still called a theory even though it's established fact?
Every modern scientific theory is also a fact. Now, people will point to something like string theory, but string theory is a theory in mathematics, not in
Correct.
science, and the rules are different in science. Now, if you go back to pioneer science, there was a time when there was things like phlogiston theory, for example, that was disproved. But what was phlogiston theory replaced by? Antoine Lavoisier disproved phlogiston by his proposal of oxygen theory, the theory of oxygen. The theory of oxygen has never been proved because science has a rule that you can't prove a theory in the positive sense. You can disprove one at most, but you can't prove it positively. So, oxygen theory. Now, is oxygen not also a fact? We all understand that oxygen is a fact. We can demonstrate that. But we don't get to say that the theory is proven. And one of the reasons why is because in science, the scientific terminology assumes that absolute proof only exists in mathematics. And if you want to take a different context, you want to take the context of an overwhelming preponderance of evidence beyond reasonable doubt. Well, now it's not absolute proof. Now it's provisional. Now it depends on your ability to reason. And so if you're arguing with a religious person, you can't prove it to them because they refuse to reason. It's not just that they can't, but even if they could, they refuse to do so because they celebrate being unreasonable as a virtue.
Mm. Mm. So, what is it with the obsession of the religious people with the ontological truth, the true essence of things, and never yielded? It's quite futile and quite fruitless. It's never yielded anything. However, when humanity directed itself to the provisional truth, the truth with the small t, the one that we can work with and create technology and help ourselves with, and give itself, it's so humble, it gives itself a space for another theory, not to replace it, because people don't understand that, but to contain it and expand the explanation of it, like the theory of gravity between Newton and Einstein. Obviously, Einstein, opposite to what everybody believes, that Einstein came and cancelled out Newton's theory of gravity. It's not true. But with that model, humanity leapt in the last 300 years so much. Yet those who would like to stick themselves to the ultimate truth, the ontological truth, the true essence of things, have never even manufactured a needle.
Yeah. A lot of people have they confuse theory with law. They have this notion that you prove a theory positively and then it becomes a law.
Yeah.
But no, a theory in science is a field of study. So it explains and encompasses or envelops hypotheses, facts, and laws specific to that field of study. There are a number of laws. I would like Newton's. There wasn't just one law of gravity. Newton had a bunch of different laws.
Yeah.
So the theory of gravity includes multiple laws of gravity, and there are multiple laws of evolution. There are natural laws of genetics and of embryology and a handful of other things. There are natural laws specific to different theories. And people don't understand that largely because they don't want to. They're not interested in the history. They're not interested in understanding. They're interested in pretending that they're best friends with the most powerful genie imaginable and that they're not really going to die. And that there's going to ultimately be that whatever bad happens to them, that there's going to be revenge, or that whatever they suffer for will somehow be rewarded. And neither one of these evidently happens most often. Terrible people go along scot-free and never even acknowledge that they've ever done anything wrong. And undeserving people, they may have dedicated their lives to their God and sacrificed everything for their Lord and all of that, and still life just keeps dealing them shitty hand after shitty hand after shitty hand. And so they suffer all the way through life until they eventually die.
Mm.
That's injustice both ways.
I subtitled today's conversation, and I can't do a southern accent. I ain't evoluted from a frickin' monkey. But I mean, there are a lot of, even in the Muslim world. I understand. I'm involved as well in the Arabic conversation in the Muslim world, and I'm not sure. I mean, it doesn't matter how many times you explain to people that the theory of evolution doesn't say we've evolved from monkeys, and then you give them the big shock that we're actually are great apes. We
Well,
are.
yeah, that we are monkeys, which is another step because yeah, but initially that we were running with Linnaean taxonomy, and Linnaean taxonomy had ranks, and it was paraphyletic. So when a lizard lost its legs and became a snake, it stopped being a lizard. But in phylogenetics, the lizard or the snake is still a lizard. There's no reason it stopped being one thing to become this subset of that thing. So, converse, in the same sense, humans, we are animals. We are multicellular eukaryotes with an internal digestive tract. We're heterotrophs. We have to sustain ourselves by ingesting and digesting living cells to survive. So we are unambiguously, ineschewably, we are animals. Even the Bible recognizes that, as does every dictionary.
Mm,
So people say I ain't no animal. Well, if you ask them what an animal is and get them to give a definition instead of an example,
mm.
then
You
they're going to
fit
have to
right in.
realize that,
Yeah, yeah.
yep, they're going to have to realize that, yeah, you're an animal. And then the subsets of that, what kind of animal are you? Well, you're a vertebrate, right? You've got a backbone, do you? Right? You're a mammal, right? You've got hair. You're warm blooded. You've got nipples. You know,
Even for men.
primate. Two opposable thumbs up for
Yeah.
primates.
Hmm.
And then when we get into like monkeys, by the way, there's a long list of what it requires to be a primate. There's all these different characteristics. And then if you are a monkey, then is any member of the suborder of Anthropoidea or Simiiformes, both of which mean the monkey clade. And that's where you already have all the defining characteristics of being a primate, plus this handful of other things. You've got color vision, you've got binocular vision, you have certain types of teeth, cuspids, bicuspids, canines, molars, and so forth. And then you've got the opposable thumbs, of course, and two pectoral mammae, not six abdominal, but two pectoral,
Yeah.
right? And you've lost the sensory whiskers. You might have hairs, but you no longer have whiskers and that sort of thing. And then these kind of ears,
Hmm.
because there's only one animal in the world that has the ears like this, the monkeys.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's diagnostic as well. And then when you get into the subsets of monkeys, you've got old world monkeys and you got new world monkeys, and then there's subdivisions, in the fossil record beyond that. But for living today, old world, young world, or new world. And if you look at old world monkeys and all the defining characteristics they have, like a tail that is reduced or absent altogether,
Hmm.
and having only fingernails, no claws, and there's a number of other. But the nostrils point downward is instead of which way do your nostrils point, right? So that's just all these defining characteristics for what an old world monkey is. And if you give all these conditions, you're describing people.
Hmm.
If you go to a particular subset of old world monkeys called apes, an ape is any member of the taxonomic superfamily Hominoidea. That includes lesser apes and great apes. And if you look at the great apes, that's Hominidae. What are the defining characteristics? The number of hair follicles that the great apes have is the same number of hair follicles that we have. If you watch a chimpanzee open, especially a young chimpanzee, open their mouth really wide, their teeth are the same. They have the exact same teeth that we do. You could trade dentures with a chimpanzee, a young, especially female chimpanzee. They're the same teeth as we have, just identical. And then fingerprints, right? These
Hmm.
uniquely identifying fingerprints. You look up close to an ape's hand.
Oh.
That's our hand, just
Mm.
right down to the most finite detail. And then subset of the great apes, we get into hominines, and now we're diverging into like Australopiths and on into early human species and that sort of thing. So when they tell me that, well, if we came from monkeys, then why are there still monkeys? My answer is, well, if we didn't come from monkeys, then why are we still monkeys?
Yeah, yeah. So genetically as well. I mean, we're talking about the difference between humans and chimpanzees, and is it chromosome number two, the one that got fused, and also the lack of vitamin C or the ability to create
Well,
vitamin C.
that goes back to the monkey group. That's not even just an ape thing. That's an old world monkey thing where they lost the ability to synthesize vitamin C, and so that we have to supplement that in our diet. And then there are ERVs, endogenous retroviruses, that are not only shared with
Oh
the
yeah.
other apes, but they're also shared with other old world monkeys too, and the specific region of the genome where these are found. And there's a genetic study that I like to source a lot. Is a molecular phylogeny of living primates, where they do this full-on whole genomic study of all of these primates and securely place humanity nested deep within hominoidea. So we are apes, definitively, by derivation and definition and morphology and molecular evidence, all of it together. There's no arguing against this. No matter how much you want to believe in Aesop's fables, you're a fucking monkey. Embrace it, accept it. It can be proven, has been proven. That's the fact, Jack. Now, if you want to pretend, if people often argue, well, what if I'm just a bag of chemicals? Did I say that you were the sum of your parts? But you have to, if you want to say that you're just a bag of chemicals, can you at least admit that you are a bag of chemicals? I mean, maybe you could say that you're something more than that, but at least admit that you are at least that. You're not
Sure.
something different from that. But there's no degree of reality that a creationist will accept. They just won't, because the whole game of creationism, the whole game of religion in general, is make believe, pretend, literally. They want to pretend something else, even if they already know that it's not true. Because, and I know this isn't true of everybody, there are sincere believers out there who have never questioned their faith, or they thought that there are plenty of smart people who believe what they've been told to believe, so they believe it, whatever. But there comes a point when you start getting into these arguments where you realize you're wrong. You realize the facts don't support creationism, and so you're forced into a situation wherein you either admit that beneficial mutations have been positively identified, that there are thousands of transitional species that have been found, and that what a theory really is, as opposed to what you were told it is, that Australopithecus is not a hoax. And you have to start realizing certain truths, that macro evolution has been directly observed and documented dozens of times, both in the lab and in naturally controlled conditions in the field. You either start having to accept and admit certain truths, or in order to remain creationist, you can no longer remain honest. You have to start lying in defense of the faith. There's no way around it.
Yes, yes. And I think I'm going to leave that creationism bit, because that's going to be the last bit of the conversation, because I'm trying to cover all the layman challenges, and I'm going to end up with these people who have, some of them have PhDs, and because to me they should know better, and if they don't know better, then they are literally lying, and I want to understand why they're doing that. But show me the evidence. We all remember this freakingly frustrating video between Dawkins and this snub American woman, who is telling him repeatedly throughout the video, show me the evidence, show me the evidence. And Dawkins was they're everywhere. Go to any natural museum in Europe or the United States, or there are abundance of fossil records of animal species, human species, everything there in front of you. The missing link, what would you say to this so frustratingly challenge?
I was working with a Muslim from Somalia. It's probably the first Muslim that I'd ever come to know in real life. It was many, many years ago. and we're working together in some store, and so he wants to argue religion because it's the only thing he knows. Right? It really is, and so he wants to argue religion all the time, and he says, "Well, what is your problem with the Holy Quran?" I'm like, "Well, I haven't read the Quran as of yet because this was, as I said, this was decades ago. It's like, I don't know, 30, 40 years now." And I said, my biggest problem with the Quran is it's based on the Bible, and the Bible is just rubbish. The Bible is no kind of foundation. And he says, "Well, what is your problem with the Bible?" And I'm like, "Oh fuck, yeah, I don't want to spend the next 6 months listing all my problems.
Where do I start?
So yeah, let me just try to give a summary here. I'm like, okay, well, the Bible. What is the quickest answer that doesn't involve me in a 6-month argument with this religious fella? I said, well, the Bible doesn't mention dinosaurs, for example. And that guy doubled over laughing at me. And we're working in a store. So customers are coming into the store and he's laughing and people want to know what he's laughing about. So he points to me and he says, he believes dinosaurs. And then he realizes that nobody else thinks that's funny. So his amusement, I saw his amusement shift to alarm when he realized that every American believes in dinosaurs. He thought that dinosaurs were a story that was told to children, that it was a fairy tale thing that was only told to children.
Yeah.
And so we had to explain to him that we know dinosaurs are real. And now he wants to know how we know that they're real. I'm like, fuck, I'm on a dig with this. Shit. I mean, you want to say that fossils are fake? Come with us. Find fossils. I'm surprised you've never found a fossil. They're easy to find once you have an eye. Once you develop an eye for how to recognize them. Some things are really easy to recognize because they're shark's teeth or they're ammonite shells or they're easily recognizable things. But if you get a little bit of training in it, people can help you identify actual bones, and you'll be able to tell the type of texture of bone when you find it in the field. We can find fossils. And I just encouraged him to go down to the Natural History Museum. I said, my daughter at the time, when she was working in the lab at the Natural History, well, not at that time, but there was a time when my daughter was working at the lab in the Natural History Museum down in the basement. So she has not the displays that they put up, because very often you can't put up a full-up dinosaur skeleton of the original stone, because that would weigh 50 tons. So what they do is they make plaster casts of these. But they still have vaults of the original fossil material in the lab downstairs, and so you can go see them. I've been on a tour of a couple of different paleo labs where I get to see the original material as it was brought in, as they're removing it from the matrix or whatever. And it's quite amazing stuff. And when I was in South Africa, I was very impressed. These people are so good that they can recognize one or two surface features and realize what this rock contains.
Wow.
And then they would bring it back to the lab, and then they do a CT scan on it and identify the fossil inside.
Wow.
So
okay.
Yeah,
that's such a skill.
You can only see like a couple of indicative marks on the outside. This looks like this is like dentition, or this is a portion of a skull. The rest of this is encased in stone. We need to we can get the stone out using a laser or whatever. They're using certain tools. You can get the stone out, but when you put it in a CT scan, now they can look through the rock. I'm like, there it is. That's a Dinocephalian skull, just like the guy said, and I see it on the CT scan. Wow, you got a good eye. And so they would extract these. So they've got a long shelf of all these skulls that came in from innocuous-looking rocks that just showed a couple of surface features that were indicative of what was still hidden inside that. And of course, a lot of other fossils are not hidden in the matrix. They're out where you can see them. We were on an expedition in the Eocene of Wyoming, and that we were able to pick up just fossils on the surface. And most of the stuff that we were finding was like scutes of crocodilians or the shells of turtles, but every now and then we'd find mammal bones or what have you. My daughter found, well, not my daughter, my wife found bones for a rhino-like horse, and also for a horse-like rhino, because in the Eocene there were as yet neither horses nor rhinos,
Hmm.
but the ancestors for both were almost the same animal.
Okay.
So horses and rhinos are very closely related. When you get down to the root of the family tree, they're virtually indistinguishable.
Wow. So the problem with this one here, they will have you thinking, okay, well, you found the old fossils of the same animals, but transitional species, these animals were created exactly the way they were, according to Noah, and what you're finding is just their older selves, But show me
Okay.
then the transition between something. Is there such a thing?
Well, I did just describe one, didn't I?
Yeah, yeah.
So
But the
intermediate between horses and rhinos. We're finding that in the Eocene. And when I was in South Africa, that was Permian. So the exposure with the erosion left Permian fossils on the surface. So when we're walking around looking for fossils, the stuff that we're finding was from 263 million years ago. And this was determined by doing radiometric analysis of ash flows, both above and below the strata that we were, the exposed area that we were working on. Now, everything we found was a transitional species, especially if it had anything to do with the mammalian lineage. I found a synapsid that, unfortunately, I didn't get a complete skull. I only got a skull fragment. I was able to see the foramen magnum, so I was able to identify it as a synapsid, but I didn't have enough. There wasn't enough skull there to name a species. You almost have to have teeth.
right.
Yeah, otherwise it's just a. But I had an impressive, like part of a brain case with the foramen magnum in there, and so I have something. But the thing is all of these, all of these animals, they're not what we would call reptiles. But 100 years ago, they would say that they were reptiles, but they're not reptiles, nor are they mammals yet. They're intermediate, and there are like 100 different types of intermediate between what they used to call reptiles and what they call mammals.
Yeah.
All of them are transitional. So when they say, well, there's no transitional species, the fuck are you looking for? I can show you. I know somebody that's compiling or is trying to update a list that was, 30 years ago, it was a list of hundreds of transitions just within vertebrates. And so there's somebody now trying to update that list with documentation behind everything so that they can just show an updated list, because there's been a paleontological boon in the last 50 years where we like practically all the transitional species that have been found in the last 50 years. So just within vertebrates, it now numbers in the thousands,
Yeah.
and that
Yeah.
includes unambiguous dinosaurs with feathers.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Lots
Yeah.
of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
You know what? While you were talking, Aaron, I was just thinking. Oh, sorry. To have species that's sort of named after you after you've discovered them, because that would be such a cool name.
yeah, I was very hopeful and optimistic that I would be able to name something, but no. As a matter of fact, while I was there was somebody on our team found a fossil that disproved one of my own hypotheses.
Right.
I held that I wanted to believe that turtles were not true reptiles; that they were para reptiles. And that there was another group in the Permian, or is it? Yeah, to cotylosaurs, and they were anapsids. So I wanted turtles to be the last living lineage of these anapsids, and then somebody found a transitional turtle that showed that it had diapsid fenestra, but
Uh
that they were
huh.
in a secondary condition, meaning that
Yeah.
that this that the turtles had were diapsid, had the fenestra to be classified as diapsid, and secondarily lost them. It's not that they never had them, which is the defining characteristic, whether it's an anapsid or whether it's diapsid, whether it's a true reptile or whether it's a para-reptile. And then this, when I say turtle, I'm being generous because it neither has plastron nor carapace. All it has is the super broad ribs, because a turtle shell is um, a cuticle over that's on top of the skin, whereas the ribs are beneath the skin, and they become like a unit.
Mm-hmm.
And the Unitosaurus doesn't have the shell, but it has the really broad ribs, where the ribs are so broad they almost touch each other. And so we're looking at a turtle with no shell.
Right. Right. Interesting. Very interesting. Now, the last couple of segments before we finish today's conversation is when you said, "Oh, I've just given you a transition species," but even when Darwin came up with the theory of evolution and talked about how animals could have evolved, people didn't challenge him that much. Actually, as a matter of fact, people say, "You know what? It sounds plausible," but he avoided talking about humans. And it's only when people started saying, "Oh, but we're different. Animals can evolve all they like, but we are made in the image of God." And once you touch this area, suddenly all hell breaks loose. No, we're different. We're the sons of God. Can you then apply the same method to humans?
Yeah. So Darwin caught a lot of shit because he said that his first book was on the origin of species by means of natural selection. And even young Earth creationists accept that speciation happens, and they accept that
Yeah.
natural selection is real. So they actually accept Darwinian theory whole hog. They just
Yeah.
don't realize it. Now, there was a secondary, like a subtitle for Darwin's book, which was,
It's the struggle for,
the struggle for survival among favored races, something like that.
correct. Yeah.
And people say, races. He's talking about races. Well, yes, in that book, he was talking about races of cabbages
Yes.
and races of mussels.
Not human.
Because
Yeah.
the word race meant either subspecies or species. The word race could mean either one or both. And so that's the context that he was using. He was not, as you pointed out, he was not talking about people. And the beautiful thing about that was, while Darwin is criticized for being racist because he said racism in a book where he wasn't talking about human races, when you get into the Descent of Man, now he does talk about
Yes.
races.
Yes.
And in there's the only racist quote. You have to take it out of context, but there's the only racist quote there was from Darwin talking about how the savage races versus the white, and he was saying that the Caucasian race was not the pinnacle.
Mm-hmm.
That we can imagine a better future race than we are now. And this is early in the book. Early in the book, he's using the language that was ubiquitous in anthropology to that day. All of the other anthropologists of his time were Christian and exceedingly racist. They held, and this is all of them,
Yeah.
from Agassiz to Linnaeus to all of them. They held that God had created multiple races, that he created them distinctly, that he made them distinct by making them different colors and putting them on separate continents with the intention that they remain separate.
Mm-hmm.
So Darwin, later in the book, as I said, he starts out talking like every other anthropologist of his time. But then he starts calling out the people that are making these claims and where is the basis for this claim. And he starts pointing out that, this guy says there's 4 races. This one says there's 6. This one says there's 63. And then he starts calling out other things where you take the same exact person, you present it to these 2 guys, they'll identify it as 2 different races, but it's the same person, right? So he's realizing that he's exposing the anthropological community of his time. And so what Darwin did toward the end of that very book, the one that he's out of context quoted for saying something about savage races or lower races, because they all talked in terms of higher or lower, and Darwin contested that. He said there's no such thing as higher or lower. that everything's on a branching tree pattern, so there is no higher. He said that there's not even an issue of superior or inferior, because that is determined by the particular situation for each animal. So he rejected the notion of superiority as well. But by the end of that, he became the first scientist ever to call out all of the other anthropologists and say that regardless of your color or continent, we are all one and only same race. There is only one human race. There may have been other races, and indeed there were other human races in the past, by the definition that he was using in the 19th century.
Yes, yeah.
But in his time, no, there's only one. Everybody, everywhere, what you might call Native Americans or Eskimos or African or Asian, whatever. Everybody's the same race. He was the first person to say that. Now, I'm trying to remember. Franz Boas, 16 years later, got credit for saying that the first time because he did it in a simple quotable bumper sticker or T-shirt sentence.
Yeah.
And when Darwin said it, it was a whole page.
So it was lost in
calling out how ridiculous all this is, because he wrote this huge ass essay in Descent of Man, showing how everybody's wrong and stupid for saying these things. And so it was brilliant. The way that Darwin gets accused of racism, despite everything he wrote, just it amazes me. It is so unfair. And Hitler was no Darwinist. Hitler was a creationist. Hitler didn't understand evolution. He rejected it outright. He only mentioned it once in Mein Kampf. And that was when he rejected it outright. When he said that he said that the same arguments that creationists always make. Hitler said that that evolution could only occur within definite limits within a species, but that the evolution of new species couldn't happen.
Yeah, so microevolution. Yeah.
Yeah, he equated that to belief in the evolution of new species and such. He equated that to being like a sin unto the eternal creator. Hitler was a creationist, did not accept evolution. But all my life, I was told that Hitler was a Darwinist and that Darwin was a eugenicist. And Darwin was no. They blamed Darwin. Ken Ham blames Darwin for the Aboriginal genocide that was already going on when Darwin went to Australia. And Darwin and this was decades before he came up with this theory, by the way. So Darwin shows up and he sees the genocide being performed against the Aboriginal people, and he's talking about what a terrible thing this is and what should be done to stop it. We can't be so inhuman to each other. Darwin always only ever spoke on behalf of the indigenous people versus imperial colonialism. He spoke against his own people for the subjugation that they were doing against everybody else. So it's a grotesque injustice for people today to say that Darwin was a racist or a eugenicist or that he believed in the superior race or any of that shit.
So lots of I mean they call him atheist as well because of the atrocities, and the guy had the buckle, as Christopher Hitchens always talked about it, Gott mit uns, God with us, on the buckle of these Nazi soldiers. So these people just read superficially and never really read, because Darwin's essay, unless you go through the whole thing, you don't understand. If you read the first few sentences, you think, oh, this guy is a racist. But you need to read the whole thing, because he develops an idea, and I think he was genius. He was actually entertaining the culture at the time, so people will actually go, oh yeah, he's talking our language. Then he drags you into reading it just to develop and establish the argumentation that no, you got it wrong. We're all one species.
And that's the difficulty that people today have. They are not in the mindset of the 19th century, when all of this was brand new and earth-shattering information.
Yeah,
I love the history of science, really, in discussing all of this. Like if you go back before Darwin, look at Carolus Linnaeus, the guy who invented taxonomy. Now he believed that God created 4 species of people. And he classified 6 species of people, because he classified chimpanzees and orangutans as humans. So that's interesting. and he wrote that he can't tell the difference. There's not a taxonomic difference between humans and apes. None. And he challenged the scientific community to show him one. So there's one revelation. Linnaeus comes up with this thing when he realizes, when he classifies everything, that they don't fall into boxes of created kinds like you would expect that they would. If he was a creationist, he's expecting that God created all these different kinds of animals. But what he's seeing is an in-depth, multi-layer family tree that's implying common ancestry. And he has no explanation for that. Right? He's beside himself. And why are people apes? Why are we the same thing as them? So he's got that dilemma. And then a little bit, what was the next one I was going to call upon? Oh, the father of paleontology, Cuvier. Cuvier was the one that realized, somebody brought him a mosasaur skull that had been found in the Netherlands. And so it was originally classified as a whale. Then they realized it's not a whale, it's a reptile. And then they thought that the only reptile this big is a crocodile, but no, this was not the size of a crocodile. This was the size of a whale.
Right.
And then Cuvier studied it and realized, no, this isn't a crocodile. It's a lizard. And I don't mean a dinosaur. I mean a lizard, an actual lizard.
Size of a whale.
Like its closest living relative would be like the Komodo dragon. This was a lizard. Except that, like you said, it's the size of a whale. This is a 40-foot fucking lizard. And so the guy realizes that if there were 40-foot, and later they found 60-foot lizards, but if there are 40-foot fucking lizards out there somewhere, where we've been doing whaling all over the world for centuries, somebody would have noticed these things. They have to breathe air. They're tied to the surface. They have to, this was a fully marine one. It had flippers instead of hands, so it can't even crawl out of the water. They stay in the water all the time, but they got to stay at the surface, don't they?
Right, yeah.
These things would be eating people. These things would be eating whales.
Right.
These things would be sinking whaling ships if these things were still out there. And so Cuvier realized that on top of a bunch of other fossils, like of mammoths and mastodons and things like that, he realized there was another world before the world of men. Now, just imagine when he wrote about full-on extinctions and everything, and how the animals we have today did not exist back then, and the animals back then don't still exist now. That there was a different world in the past. Imagine what a bomb that was to drop on the worldwide scientific community. Imagine what earth-shattering news that would be. Right?
Unbelievable. Yeah.
So
Crazy.
I think the history of the science is just fascinating.
Absolutely. We've got like 6 or 7 minutes to go, so I'm gonna take that time to zone in on creationism. We're talking about the ID movement. I was just talking to Dave the other day. We had a conversation on my channel, and it seems that your Behe and Dembski, they kind of disappeared. It's only James Tour at the moment, and he's also kind of fading away at this point. What is happening to the ID movement?
Well, nobody takes Tour seriously. I mean, come on. I mean, for one thing, he's talking outside of his field, and he's literally saying that the scientists don't know what the scientists know. The people who are working in original life research know what they know. And they know that Tour is a synthetic biologist, whatever.
Yes, yeah, chemist. Yeah.
So he's trying to put everything in his terms.
Synthetic chemist. Yeah.
His literal argument is that science doesn't know anything, because the creationists always have to use the argument that scientists don't know what they know, so that the creationists can pretend to know what they don't. And James Tour doesn't accept any of the science. Don't let him kid you. He doesn't accept that the Earth is millions of years old, and that there was a time when, like the setting for the beginning of life on Earth. He doesn't accept the setting for that. That that was like 4 billion years ago, and these prebiotic conditions. No, he doesn't accept any of that, because he believes in the Bible. He just can't say that because he knows it undermines his argument as trying to pretend as if it's motivated by science when it is not.
So when he says, "I don't think there's enough time for DNA and cell to evolve," he's thinking 6,000 years.
Evidently. So let's put this in another scale. So we don't just have one experiment, one place, one time, one thing doing this. It's a population of cells or a population of pre-cellular matrix everywhere, all over, constantly reproducing, minute to minute to minute, new reproductions. And there's not just mutations going on, there's also endosymbiosis and horizontal gene transfer where these things can crash into each other and absorb genetic material and everything. And that's just the basis of it. Because I've got a list of dozens of different studies for different incremental stages, maybe sequential stages for different chemical processes that are involved in the origin of life. Creationists always want to say that, when did they ever show life from non-life in an experiment? This is complex, so the answer is going to be complex. It's not a one-time thing. It's not life from non-life in a single fucking experiment. There are dozens of different incremental steps, each becoming more and more complex, each incorporating more things like development of amino acids and polynucleotides and all of this and this and this and this, and you keep compounding and adding on to these. And then when after a certain amount of repeated cycles of inundation, irradiation, and dehydration and everything, you add a phosphate at the right moment, and boom, you got ribonucleotides. That's how this shit works. And then when you have ribonucleotides, well, that still ain't life. Right, dumbass, that still isn't life. We still got a bunch of other steps to get there. But you want it all to be in one step, don't you? Because they don't accept population level changes over myriad generations, over millions of years. No, they want one fish, one individual fish named Bob, who decided to grow legs and walk out of the ocean one day. They are determined not to understand because they don't want to. They want to make believe in something else. They don't want to know what the truth is.
What about Michael B? Has he completely disappeared from the scientific community? I know there was a bit of embarrassment around the specified complexity and the irreducible complexity and things like that. Has he sort of completely dropped from the scene, or?
Oh no, he's still out there. But the thing is, he accepts more evolution than creationists want to admit.
Right.
He
So
accepts
okay.
he accepts a higher degree of common ancestry than they want to admit. They want to argue that their own citations are working against them now.
Right.
And what it always comes down to is whether there's a God or not. So you can accept all of evolution and still pretend that there's a God. And yet that's what
true. Very true.
Yeah, go ahead. We don't care. But what they want to do is not the problem with creationists is they're not actually arguing for a God because they don't worship a deity. They worship a book.
Mm.
And the book is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. Whether God exists or not, the Bible and the Quran are both wrong.
Completely agree.
Man-made mythology. They both say ridiculous things. They both include bad science that as prophetic that was already known at the time and was already known to be wrong. Right? I mean, the Quran makes reference to Galen's faulty research, and this is supposed to be one of the miracles of the Quran. No, it's really not. It's a miracle you guys haven't figured out what's wrong with this by now.
In the memory of the great man, and I know you had sort of kind of a friendship, and you've met him a few times, Daniel Dennett, the man who coincidentally died on the same day Darwin died. He looked very much almost like him towards the end.
Great champion of Darwin. Dennett said that Darwin was his favorite scientist of all history.
I think there's a book. What is it called? Darwin's Dangerous Idea.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to thank Dennett for having written that and been involved in the documentary film. As a matter of fact, that was such a good documentary that it was, or such a good biography that it had documentary science bits in it. And what I did was I realized that the documentary bits where they're explaining evolutionary processes, but it's taking away from the biography. So I removed them, edited them out of the biography part, and I uploaded, Darwin. I called it Darwin's Dangerous Biography,
Mm-hmm.
and I uploaded it to my channel for free. I didn't monetize it because I would have just gotten a copyright block, but I
Right.
wanted people to see and enjoy the biography alone itself, because it's solid stuff.
Fantastic, man. Fantastic. It contributes a lot to the argument about consciousness and free will. And I owe a lot to him in terms of developing my ideas and thoughts about these subjects. Now, before we end, Aron, would you like to tell the viewers, we've got a few of them here, over 340 people watching, where they can, in the description of the video, guys, it's Aron's YouTube channel. Please look it up. It's a fantastic channel. What is your next project? What are you doing next?
Right now, I'm working on a video that I'm hoping to have out this weekend, but unfortunately, all of my phylogeny videos take a lot longer to make
Yeah.
than I expect. I will spend at least a week on a whole week, and I mean just spending all my available time on it. But I'm doing one on the phylogeny of Xenarthra, which is the line of South American mammals, the anteater, the sloth, and the armadillos, that sort of thing. I've been working on that for the last few days. I'm hoping that I'm gonna have that out by Monday. But if anybody wants to look me up, I mean, I've been doing this gig full time as my only means of income for a bit now, and things have gotten tight. So if you want to go to patreon.com/ARONRA, become a patron, please. I need all the help I can get, because it really is increasingly becoming it's an ever tightening struggle.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a worldwide phenomenon at this point. But it's not a charity. I think you provide so much information. Anybody who's a biology or evolution enthusiast, by subscribing to your channels, there's so much information in return. There's so much information, and also fun, because I think you're a little bit different. You're not just an academic who just provide boring information. It's always accompanied by fantastic stories and few anecdotes and few jokes. So it's always very light-hearted. And I really thank you for being part of this worldwide community of trying to explain things to people that reality is not what's written in the sacred books. It's completely different in the real natural world. So thank you so much again, Aron.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, and I would like to read this very last comment, and it's a funny one. So it's actually directed to you, Aron, but it's a take on Kinthoven and Muhammad Jajab, who asked for a species that is halfway between a man and an ape, and have their wish fulfilled only if they take a look in the mirror.
I would love to see. I always wanted to see a debate between Kinthoven, young Earth creationist, and somebody like one of the flat Earth people, one of the leading flat Earth people, because that would be the first time that Kinthoven would actually be able to win a debate, and he'd be able to win with science. He'd be able to use science to win, but he'd still lose.
I know. He's just such a
he would be right, but he would still lose the debate because he's going up against himself in another incarnation.
Yes.
Because the kind of just disingenuous tactics that the flat earthers use are the same kind of nonsense bullshit that Kinthoven himself uses, and he would have no way to counter it.
Agreed. Well, this was a fantastic conversation. Thank you very much. Once again, guys, description of the video's got all Aron's Patreon account, YouTube account. Please have a look. Fantastic material in there. And thank you so much, Aron, for appearing on Critical Faculty one more time. And until then, we bid you all goodbye.